Today's the final stretch of my ecology class, and today we're going to learn about water hardness and the Aquascape ecosystem. Hey, what's up everybody? Ed the Pond Professor here. I'm coming to you from Aqualand today, our beautiful corporate headquarters, St. Charles, Illinois, the water garden capital of the world. And this is our retail showroom where you can see all types of ecosystem water features that we've created over many, many years. What I love about this is my classroom. This is where everything operates and we learn from it. But the basis of everything I do always come from ecology. Remember last week we talked about the Aquascape Ecosystem pyramid. We also talked about the very critical nitrification cycle as well as pH. All these different things work together in any type of an ecosystem. So today what I want to do is really dive into a little bit more detail about water hardness, which I believe is critical for a healthy ecosystem because it's the weathering process for all the rocks and the minerals out there that dissolve slowly in rainwater. They get leached into our groundwater, and then that actually feeds our ecosystem with the important dissolved nutrients and minerals that they need to actually operate. And that's exactly what we use on any scale. If I'm doing exotic animals down in Florida, if I'm doing hyenas at the Toronto Zoo, actually I'm designing stuff as we speak for Africa. I'm going to the continent of Africa. I'm going to be down in the southern section working in Namibia on some amazing stuff. But in my head, I always go back to those basics, the simplistic things of how our world operates from an ecological standpoint. Remember, I'm a root word guy, ecos, ecology. The root word of ecology comes from oikos, which means the home. Ology means study of something. So basically what it literally means is the study of the home. What I love about that concept that Stephen Forbes developed way back in the mid 1800s was creating a microcosm of life. In order to understand a fish, a koi, a sturgeon, whatever it may be, in order to understand those little animals, you have to understand that pyramid concept, what it feeds on it, what the water chemistry is supposed to be like inside of its native habitat. All of these things are important building blocks that we utilize on all projects that we do anywhere in the world. So stay tuned today because that water hardness, I believe, is foundational to everything that I do, as well as the very, very important Aquascape ecosystem that we developed back in the 90s. I can't believe it's already been 30 plus years since we've actually started developing this stuff. And it was a slow process, and all the way along that entire process took us 5 years to really fine-tune the recipe. Once we got it dialed in, we have since been replicating it thousands of times all over the world personally, not including all the other CACs and contractors that have been learning from Brian, Greg, myself, the incredible team here at Aquascape that are designing and building stuff on a nationwide level. What I love about it is it continues to confirm what we do, and that simplistic Aquascape ecosystem, having a skimmer filter on one side, biofilter on another, and then we have all that beautiful rock and gravel in between that is loaded with different types of aquatic vegetation, as well as those critical building blocks for life to occur. My goal is to create water the way nature intended.
He's always bringing you real world experiences, and he's not afraid to tell you how they failed to get the research on what they're doing and then prevail later on in perfecting their craft.
So I actually came last year for the first time for Eds Class. I'm a big believer in you could always learn more and more. And I think the more times you put it in your head, the more you'll just remember it. And when you could just remember and talk to the customer with a total professional answer and not have to think about it, I think that is really important in selling these bigger projects.
A really big thing was nice about Ed's class this time was the rock calculations. And it really dived deep into the bigger rock and how it doesn't scale. And you need much more tonnage to try to finish a project versus what they use for their smaller 11 by 16 ponds.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot more large project requests. I'm sure a lot of people have, rec ponds are huge right now. And so just to kind of reaffirm some of the things that we do know and then just help us with some of the things that we weren't sure about or didn't know. So it was very helpful.
The company I work for is a full design build firm. We invest a lot into training, and a lot of it is, again, very generic, right? And it might even be on a smaller scale than some of the stuff that's not so generic about Pandemonium, where this is so personal, so fixed on the advanced categories that there's not many companies that are really doing that stuff quite yet, where, you know, this is mainly focused on those super advanced builds. This is so much more in depth.
Just don't question it. Don't think about it. Just sign up and come. If you start trying to dissect it and think about, is it worth it? Is it worth the investment? You don't know until you come.
It can only have a positive impact. I had to make decisions in my company, my business, because of how, losing my husband and taking over his aspect, and I needed to make sure that I can do it. I was doubting myself through all of this because I didn't think I was good enough. Coming here, being with all these people and everybody reinforcing to me that no, I am and I do know what I'm doing, it was that lift I needed to say, no, I have this. I've been here for 20 years. I just needed that confidence, and they gave it back to me.
People that have not been to this academy, it is a very good opportunity for you to meet professionals in the industry. And by meeting other professionals, you hear how their businesses run. It's just an awesome community. You feel like you're a part of the family.
So for all of you science fanatics out there just like me and you love designing and build aquatic ecosystems, please let me know your comments. Give me your thoughts. Let me know what you'd like to see on future vlogs and videos, and tell me something that you learned in this brand new ecology class. So what actually is water hardness? Water hardness is a combination of different minerals that are actually going to be found in your water. So it's typically going to be calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. Those are the two main ones that we typically measure. Now, what we're going to talk about here is actually that hardness scale. The reason I kind of touched upon this briefly during the pH is because I actually like having slightly hard water. By having some of those minerals inside of the water, it's going to create a more stable environment. And what I mean by stable, it means the pH is going to hold at a specific level, and it's because the calcium carbonate is actually going to buffer everything. And you're going to hear some of these terms that are thrown around on a regular basis, but having hard water is actually your buffering capacity. So that means if I add some acid into it, through the process of decomposition, through the process of nitrification, when acids are produced, they're going to actually be consumed and buffered out by the hardness that's in the water. So if we look here at our water, what our water table is, so this is showing parts per million of calcium carbonate, but it's typically calcium and magnesium carbonate depending upon your geographic areas. So calcium carbonate is more predominantly found in areas where you have high limestone. Magnesium carbonate is more dolomitic limestone, so it has more dolomite in it, which is where that magnesium is going to come into play. But sometimes it's a blend of those two. So when we start looking at all these things, we want to understand how they're going to relate to each other. Now, very hard water can be very difficult to work with. So what's going to happen when we have very hard water? You have 300 plus parts per million of calcium carbonate in the water. You're actually going to have scale building up on stuff. You're actually going to see kind of that white residue that's actually coating things. And again, this might not be a problem. Sometimes it can be a little bit more conducive to algal growth, but these are things that we could actually control a little bit. So we do have some other things that we could add to the water to help control some of those algae issues. But what it is, we want to try to understand how all these different pieces and parts to work together. So I think the areas that we really want to work with are going to be more here. In certain areas where we have softer water, that can become a little bit more critical, and I would recommend not having really high stocking rates. The reason I'm saying that is if you have a very high stocking rate in a system, say it's a koi pond and it's loaded up with fish and you're feeding them very, very heavily, what's going to happen is you're going to actually deplete the calcium carbonate out of the water, and it could create a very unstable environment. When this occurs, ammonia actually becomes a little bit more toxic and acidic type of a condition. And this is what I started talking about briefly with understanding the pH and the hardness and the nitrogen cycle. So they all feed into one another. That nitrification cycle is responsible for the cycling of all those nutrients. They're going to produce compounds that are going to be more acidic. It's going to remove that ammonia out of the water. It's going to start to alter the pH. The pH, we have to understand it because we don't want big swings. And then that calcium carbonate, that hardness, is actually going to help us to create a stable environment. So the reason I say it, like I was just talking about in the example, if you have softer water, you may not want to have high fish loads because it could become very unstable. You could start to stress your fish. This is why some of the koi growers will actually add oyster shells and things like that into their systems. Not that I'm recommending that to any of you. Again, that's for a very specialized environment, but I'm trying to discuss how they actually all tie in together and create this beautiful functioning ecosystem for us. All right, so what does this all mean for the Aquascape ecosystem? So where it all started, learning from nature. Actually, this is a little bit of an older picture of me, but what I thought was kind of unique about it was this was right at the Continental Divide. This was high up in the mountains. The water on one side of this watershed was going to overflow to the Pacific Ocean. If it went the other way, it would go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So literally at the top of the Continental Divide, which is kind of cool. So this is pure 100% snow melt is feeding this ecosystem. But when I look at things, and again, I'm always trying to deconstruct stuff, and that's exactly what we've done at Aquascape through all that R&D over the years. Was we deconstructed aquatic ecosystems and we figured out that right mixture, the right recipe of pieces and parts to create beautiful aquatic ecosystems. So when you follow this stuff, all that water quality stuff I just discussed, you have to understand it. But if you follow the recipe properly, if it's stocked properly and you put all the right pieces in place, you're going to have beautiful, fully functioning ecosystems without a lot of headaches. You're not going to have issues. The reason we talked about those water quality parameters was so you could have an understanding of the importance of them and how they actually impact the ecosystem. So that 5 year of research and development, that was back in the early 90s. So that was in those early years when we were creating those skimmers and biofalls and trying to figure out what worked, why it worked, and why it did not work. So some of these processes we still are going through today. We're always pushing the boundaries to come up with that right recipe. But so far, this is what we've done. We continue to prove this method out on a daily basis. Our team of construction and designers here in our office, we're designing and build aquatic ecosystems in and around the Chicagoland area on a daily basis. We're also maintaining them. So by doing that, we're really fine-tuning this recipe. And if we ever have issues, we're going to understand it immediately. And that's what I love about it. So here's the current working model that we've created over all those years. So I'm going to start out over here on the left-hand side with our skimmer system. I believe this is the most important part. And again, if your client has a limited budget, the first thing that you want to do is put it in a skimmer system. I would definitely recommend biofalls and all the other pieces, but again, there's always budgets in certain situations. The reason why the skimmer is important is because it's going to help control debris in the aquatic ecosystem. I talked earlier about the pH. I talked about the nitrification cycle. So when you have leaf debris that falls inside of the pond and it's left unchecked, it's going to start to decompose. During that decomposition process, it's going to release nutrients in the water. It's going to start to change the pH. It's going to release acids actually into the water. So we want to manipulate and we want to control that. So by having the skimmer in place, any debris that falls on the surface of the pond is going to get sucked easily into that skimmer basket where it can be removed. The other thing that's inside of the skimmer, it's basically, it's a housing for our pump. So the pump is going to sit down here on the very, very bottom. So this is another important part. We want to use a pump that's designed for 365-day use. So every single day, 24 hours a day, that pump is operating because that's literally the heart of the ecosystem. If that gets shut down, it's shutting the heart off. And you know what happens when a heart goes off? You're going to perish very quickly. So you have to keep that operational in order to get the desired results that you're looking for. So as that pump is working, it's going to draw water in, it's going to take that water, it's going to deliver it all the way over here to our biofalls, and it's going to be discharged into the bottom. And as that pump is working, as we said, it's going to suck in all that surface debris. It's also going to bring in highly oxygenated water into the skimmer box. So again, the water that's in contact with the atmosphere has the highest dissolved oxygen. It's going to get drawn into the skimmer box. The reason I'm saying that is because as that fast-moving water gets discharged into the bottom of the biofilter, we have that little swirl chamber right down here in the bottom. Sediments are going to settle out a little bit. Then the water is going to flow up through the filter pads and then back over as the waterfall. The reason we're talking about all this right now is that nitrification process is happening right there. So all those filter pads, the bioballs, that media inside of there is basically a huge colony of living organisms. All those organisms are taking the nutrient-rich water, they're gonna slowly break it down. They're gonna detoxify the water, creating it healthy for all the inhabitants, which include our fish. The reason we have that waterfall on the outfall is because this process requires oxygen. So that highly oxygenated water that's in direct contact with the atmosphere is slowly gonna be depleted. Through those biological processes, the waterfall is gonna replenish the oxygen, and then the system could return itself. Other important pieces inside of this ecosystem are obviously the rubber liner that's holding the water in place. But from an ecosystem perspective, it's all of this rock and gravel down here in the bottom of the pond. All of that rock and gravel, that's that learning from nature. That's deconstructing natural aquatic ecosystems. The rock and gravel substrate provides home for more microorganisms. When we start talking about an ecosystem, remember right from the very beginning, it's an interacting community of the organisms to their physical environment as well as the surrounding atmosphere. So that physical environment, that rock and gravel substrate is very, very important because it's going to be teeming with life. It's going to have stuff living all through it. And all those organisms are going to be recycling all the nutrients that are from the fish waste, from uneaten fish food that could be building up inside, from windblown debris. So there's always inputs coming into our ecosystem. We want to have everything set up properly to manage all those pieces. Starts with the skimmer. Next piece is going to be the biofalls, then you're going to have the rock and the gravel and the proper pump. And then the final pieces are going to be the aquatic plants, as well as the fish. The reason we want to have aquatic plants is during that nitrification cycle, we said that the process is going to take the ammonia from the fish waste, turn it all the way back to nitrate. Nitrate is food for your plants. It's food for algal growth. So these are the building blocks for the ecosystem itself. So by having those nutrients available, you're gonna have abundant plant growth, and they're gonna help to absorb all those nutrients and cycle it back up through the leaf structures of the plant itself. During that process, they're gonna release oxygen into the atmosphere as well as into the aquatic ecosystem itself, underwater. So you're going to have algal growth, and that algae is going to produce oxygen through the day. So it's the perfect mixture of things. The final piece is going to be those pond inhabitants. By having those fish in place down here in the bottom, they're going to help to feed off of all of the things that are living in the little nooks and crannies in the bottom of the pond. So they're an important part of the cycling of the ecosystem. And again, most of the fish that we're putting inside of our aquatic ecosystems are going to be goldfish, they're going to be koi, they're going to be bottom feeders. So these are basically, they're omnivores or detritivores. So that means they're going to feed on anything from plant material to animal material. So they're going to help to cycle the stuff that's growing inside of the ecosystem. Their waste product is actually going to be detoxified by our biofilter. So by having a pond with fish, you're actually going to get better water quality because those fish are feeding on the bottom, and it's known as a bioturbation. So a bioturbation is basically an animal-induced disturbance. So those animals, as they're feeding around and they're rooting in the bottom of the pond, any of you that have a pond at your home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those koi fish are constantly rooting around and moving all of that material. And that's an important part of the biological filtration process. They're helping to cycle those nutrients. They're stirring everything up. They're putting that material back into suspension. As it goes into suspension, it's going to get drawn into the skimmer. From there, it will be deposited inside of the biofilters where it could be managed appropriately. So again, by having those fish inside, it's an important part of the ecosystem. They're going to cycle nutrients, and it's a good secondary food source for them. So when we start talking about these ecosystems, it's a complex interaction with everything that's living inside of there. And those fish, through their bodily growth processes, they're going to take stored nutrients from the detritus on the bottom, from the algal mass, and they're actually going to add more weight onto their body. So they've actually become a storage place in their muscle tissue for nutrients inside of the ecosystem. So it's just an incredible cycle, and when everything is designed and put together properly, you will have perfect results. This is what I'm talking about when I speak about a healthy aquatic ecosystem. This feature is over 25 years old. So a 25-year-old aquatic ecosystem, a closed ecosystem that's literally a small recirculating pond. What I love about it is it continues to function, and it actually gets better and better with time because everything is balanced inside of it. The customers know exactly how much they need to fish, and the fish waste actually creates that perfect environment for these beautiful water lilies and all the other aquatic inhabitants to live symbiotically together. So as I said, it's going to continue to get better and better with time if it's designed properly. Now, if you were to overstock this with fish, you're going to have a shift in the entire ecology. So it's all about finding that correct balance, finding the right balance of plants and fish to the surface area of the pond. That's where the magic actually happens. Here's some of those disturbances I was talking down in the bottom. This is part of that normal process. You're gonna see your fish, if you're not feeding them, you're gonna see them feeding naturally, which is exactly what they should be doing. They're gonna feed on all the little microorganisms that are gonna be inhabiting all the interstitial spaces throughout that entire gravel bed. So they're constantly feeding on that stuff. And this is an important part of that entire ecosystem process. And as you can see here, that final stage from those ecosystems is actually the outside environment. So what I love about our ecosystems is they create a very unique environment that's important for the biodiversity and health of the actual surrounding geographic community. So here we have a dragonfly larva that has actually climbed out of the pond. It's actually lived in the pond its entire life. Now it's going to take off as that adult dragonfly, and it's going to consume insects and all types of other organisms outside of the ecosystem. That's when we know we've achieved our desired results and we've created that perfect aquatic ecosystem. And again, another old water feature, 25 plus years old, continues to get better with time. Everything is balanced, and actually the homeowners here, the koi located and living inside of this are huge. They have just gigantic koi that have grown up inside of the pond. The koi themselves are 25 plus years old. So they've grown up within the ecosystem. They found that balance, and when everything works together, that's when we know we've achieved our goal. I hope you enjoyed this little course today.